Now, folks, we are on lesson 14 of Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny, which is a book about resisting authoritarianism or oppressive political systems everywhere. It's basically generalized life advice on how to make sense of and properly function around, within, and against an oppressive regime. And so far, it's been full of really great advice. And I, for one, have been enjoying our dive into it. But I figure it's been long enough, and we're right on the eve of Donald Trump coming into office. So let's put in the final push and make it to the end of On Tyranny. So let's jump in to lesson 14, which is establish a private life. Good advice. Also, the graphic novel of this is sumptuous.
Hello,
Highly recommend.
I'm Timothy Snyder. I'm talking through the 20 lessons of my book On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. I'm doing this in August 2021, almost 5 years after I wrote the book in the first place, in part to reflect on where we've been the last 5 years, in part to think about the next 5, 10, 15 years, but also because the book is coming out in a new edition, one which has some updates to the text, but more importantly, one which is now illustrated by the fantastic artist Nora Krug. I think that gives the book a depth and a reach that it didn't have before. So as I've been working through this book again with Nora...
Oh yeah, I should mention that also this is... he wrote On Tyranny early on into the Donald Trump administration, and then he revisited it in this YouTube series to basically add on and provide perspective now, 4 years beyond publishing the book, kind of reflecting on the lessons, their usefulness, etc. So I think that us going through this is an especially good companion read for On Tyranny, which I cannot recommend highly enough. It's quite good, especially if you are really worried going into these darker times. I would recommend it as a read. It will give you some hope and some methods of taking action that maybe you haven't considered yet. And will also give you maybe some perspective on the success of resisting tyranny.
I've had a few thoughts about each of the lessons, which I'm sharing with you in these 20 short films. The lesson that we're going to talk about today, briefly, is number 14. Number 14 is establish a private life. I'm going to read the text of the lesson from the book and then offer a few reflections. So, establish a private life. Nastier rulers will use what they know about you to push you around. Scrub your computer of malware on a regular basis. Remember that email is skywriting. Consider using alternative forms of the internet or simply using it less. Have personal exchanges in person. For the same reason, resolve any legal trouble. Tyrants will seek the hook on which to hang you. Try not to have hooks. So this lesson, like a number of the others, is coming from my own thinking about, or really my own reading about, totalitarianism. When we think about totalitarianism, we imagine some kind of all-powerful ruler who can somehow assume total control. But that's not the way that totalitarianism really works. The way that totalitarianism works is by breaking each of us down. And the way that we're broken down is that we lose track of, or we lose control of, the border between a public life and a private life. The thing that allows us to be an individual is that we have control of that line. We have some power over how we behave in public, we have some power over how we behave in private, and we have some power over the line between those two things. So the way the digital world has moved us towards totalitarianism is by blurring that line, is by making things about us which we think are private, public, or at least accessible to those who are in a position to pay for the knowledge.
I will add on to what he's saying, that earlier, well, I guess early last year, I started realizing that if I was gaining more notoriety on the internet, one of the things about me that would leave both myself and my loved ones vulnerable is the information that the internet just passively collects on you. Um, and to that end, I wound up actually using Incogni. Not a sponsor, by the way. Not a sponsor. I actually used Legal Eagle's Incogni, you know, code to get my yearly subscription. And so far, they have spent like 200 hours taking down information of mine off of publicly accessible data broking websites. Basically, guys, so many websites have access to your full name and address and email and phone number. It's really, really ridiculous. And that's just like a handful of the things. That's just like if people don't care enough to like compile a dossier on you. It is something I would recommend a lot more people do if they can, because having a team of lawyers scouring the internet to remove your personal data is makes me feel a lot better anyway. I'll say that much. I would use that, but how do resumes work with that? I'm not entirely sure what you mean. Like, you can still fill out a resume and submit it.
About us. What we saw in the 2016 election, which was on my mind when I wrote these words, of course, in 2016 electoral campaign, was that emails and other kinds of information which might have thought to be private entered into a public conversation in a decisive way. And by no coincidence, they were brought.
Should I stop commenting on YouTube? No, never stop commenting. However, should you maybe stop commenting under like your commonly used alias and maybe instead get different aliases on different websites and not have that kind of consistent branding? Maybe. Would you suggest a good mic on a budget? Blue Yeti. Blue Yeti makes great microphones that are pretty simple, easy to use, intuitive even. And then when you're ready for the big leagues, just go for the SM7B. It's the gold standard from Shure.
Brought into this public conversation by a foreign actor which was intending to cause harm, namely Russia. And so here we had almost a perfect combination of this fact about totalitarianism, which we forget, which is that it's about protecting our private lives. It's about being able to draw that line. What tyrants will do, or what people who are trying to weaken or undermine democracy will do, is get us used to crossing that line, get us used to giving ourselves away, get us used to the spectacle of other people's private lives being constantly exposed, such that that very exposure, that very moment of revelation, even if nothing is really being revealed, that very moment of revelation becomes a substitute for the facts themselves, becomes a substitute for the things that we really need to know. Because of course the things that we need to know are the things that are produced by journalists.
Yeah, I mean, like, one of the things here is a lot of what tyranny takes from you is taken with your consent. So do not consent to it. Do not predict what it might want from you or require from you and just surrender that beforehand. You force it to try and exert pressure and power in order to take those things. Because the more it has to do that, the less control it actually has,
by reporters. The things that we need to know are facts that take actual work to produce. They're not revelations, they're not exposures. They're not the things which shock us or which immediately draw our attention. But when it comes to our own life as citizens, we have to remember that our private life, our personality, our way of being in the world, it's our bulwark, it's our base. It's the weight that allows us to stride through the world. It's what keeps us grounded. It's what keeps us on the ground. If we give away too much of ourselves for free, we lose that weight. We lose ourselves. We lose our ability to stride confidently or to take stands. We lose also our ability to have an individual perspective. Part of having a private life is reading different things than other people read. Part of having a private life is having conversations that are different than other people's conversations. Part of having a private life is just having the time and the space to think about things for yourself and to come up with your own opinions. And by your own opinions, I don't mean being against everyone else. That's a decoy. That's a fake. The idea that everyone thinks this and I think the opposite, that's not thinking, that's just falling into a trap. In order to be your own person, in order to have a private life, what you need is not just to have an us and them, a for and against, they're wrong and I'm right. You have to have your own perspective, which sometimes agrees with those people, sometimes agrees with those people, but fundamentally comes from its own place. And so again, what's so important in politics may not at first glance seem to be political. But if we want to resist totalitarianism, if we want to be the kinds of people and the kinds of citizens that can rebuild a civil society and rebuild a democracy, one place that we can start is by establishing a private life. That was lesson number 14. Thanks for being with me.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I feel like if anything, maybe an analogy here is that your private life is a kind of, rampart you raise between yourself and the world, and by having kind of the drawbridge up and more tightly controlling that information, there are less levers of power with which to move you, and your resistance. And I think that's probably wise. That's probably correct. Yeah. On to number 15. Let's go.
Hello, I'm Timothy Snyder.
Oh God, that was so loud.
Holy Mother of Christ.
Entrama, thank you for the 50 months. I fucking adore you and appreciate you. And I hope you're doing well. We must talk soon. Let's do it. Just shoot me a message on Instagram or something.
I'm talking through the lessons of my book on tyranny, 20 lessons from the 20th century. I'm doing this in the late summer of 2021 for a couple reasons. One is that it's been about 5 years almost since I wrote the book. A great deal has happened, and some of the problems that I predicted in the book turned out to be all too real. Some of the tendencies that I tried to describe in the book are still with us. Now, as we look ahead to the 2020s and into the 21st century, what I'd like to be able to do is recast the book so it doesn't seem so specific to the last few years, and give us some guidance going forward. I'm very much helped in this by the tremendous efforts of the book's new illustrator, Nora Kruk. On Tyranny is appearing in October of 2021 as an illustrated edition, which I think makes the lessons not only clearer and easier to understand, it also adds to them dimensions which make the book much more interesting, even to me, and I hope it will to you as well. So in working on this with Nora, I've been revisiting these lessons, and I'd like to revisit them with you. I'm making 20 little videos, one for each lesson. The one today.
Oh, Ray Polak, I don't think Incogni doesn't focus on all use of your name on the internet. It focuses on data brokers, specifically people who are selling your information to advertisers and to spam companies and to, all kinds of other things, nefarious ne'er-do-wells on the dark web, stuff like that. That's what Incogni focuses on. It's not going to impede LinkedIn folks sharing around your resume.
Today is number 15. Lesson 15, which is contribute to good causes. I'm going to read the text from the book, the lesson part of the book, and then share a few thoughts about this lesson. So lesson 15, contribute to good causes.
Okay.
Be active in organizations, political or not, that express your own view of life. Pick a charity or two or set up autopay. Then you'll have made a free choice that supports civil society and helps others to do good. So in this lesson,
Okay.
one thing I'm trying to do is make things easy. We know that there are countless people who are doing good things in the world, and that we can sometimes help them with a little bit of money. So in my city, in New Haven, there are people who do wonderful things with organic food, who do wonderful things with music, who do wonderful things with teaching kids to read. I try to help those people in that way, right? I can't be everywhere at all times doing all those things, but I can acknowledge other people, and I can help them.
Yeah, I mean, Salmon Moose, I would argue that I feel a lot safer with my home address not being on literally 200 different websites. I feel a lot safer as somebody who's been targeted by white supremacists. So, like I like knowing that at the very least I'm gonna make it as hard as fucking possible if they want to try and do that.
Them just by regularly supporting them with a little bit of money.
Oh, this is Timothy Snyder, Entrama. He's an author of a book called On Tyranny. It's quite good.
But the point here, of course, goes much deeper than what's easy for us to do. The point here is a profound one, I think, at least, I like to think, having to do with civil society, having to do with the nature of power in the world. I use the phrase civil society in this lesson very consciously. Civil society is a very special concept to me. It's something which comes from East European thinkers in the 1970s and 1980s who were concerned about the problem of power's ability to isolate individuals, who were concerned about the way that relationships would only flow vertically from power down to individuals. And we're trying to think of ways to have individuals come into contact with one another unpredictably on the basis of what individuals actually happen to care about, on the basis of the things that individuals...
I am going to have to look up these videos and watch them from the beginning. This is why I donate. Fart.
One Night Heathen, thank you for the $5 dono. I do have my coverage of these videos in a playlist. All the videos and segments we've done before are in that playlist on the channel.
Regarded as being important to them, for whatever reason, the things that make us unique, the things that actually are real for us. Civil society is where we have the encounters, the meetings, where we learn that others might share these interests, where we build institutions together that we couldn't build on our own. That's the deeper part of this lesson. That civil society is a place where things can happen that allow us to realize ourselves as individuals and as citizens, but that civil society also has an important political function. The civil society can do things that governments can't do, and civil society can also make sure that governments don't do some things that governments shouldn't do. Right now, we've had a recent illustration of this. I'm speaking again in summer of 2021. The American elections of 2020, sad to say, only happened the way they did, in large part thanks to civil society. In late 2020 and early 2021, we witnessed a coup attempt by a sitting American president with the support of some members of his government, happily not enough, with the support of a number of Americans, again, happily not enough. But that coup attempt was thwarted, was held off, and democracy was protected in large measure because a number of civil society organizations thought about the problem ahead of time, took steps to prevent something just like this from happening, and were ready to take action in the courts and elsewhere as necessary. From a great distance, or if you weren't involved, you might think, well, look, we had an election, the election worked, everything is fine. But the truth of the matter is that people who contributed to good causes with their money or with their time made the difference in America in 2020 and 2021. We are still living in something which can be characterized as a democracy. It's very flawed, but we're still living in something that can be characterized as a democracy in large measure thanks to civil society, which is one reason why we should be thinking about contributing to good causes. That's lesson 15. Thanks for being with me.
Yeah, unfortunately, we did not make do with the time we were given when it came to that victory window, unfortunately. Good night, Metal Kitty Mom. Get good sleep. Disappointing, but, you know, now we're here, and now we can only do the best with what we got. Let's move on to lesson 16, learn from peers in other countries. Which, yeah, learn in solidarity, folks.
This is Timothy Snyder. Greetings. I'm speaking about my book on tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. This is a book that I wrote in late 2016 to try to prepare Americans and others for what was
kind of
to
fucked
come
that one up. Yeah,
in the late 2000
fucked it up
teens.
royal.
It's a book of 20 lessons for individual and civic action. In the last 5 years, this book, I think, has been of use to some people, to my surprise, not just Americans, but people around the world. I've had occasion to revisit this book because I've updated it and am publishing it again in a new and I think in a much better form, illustrated by the fantastic graphic artist Nora Krug. So as I've been working through On Tyranny again with Nora, I've been thinking again about the lessons. I'm making these 20 videos as a way to speak about how these lessons, I think, have been useful in the last few years and how they might remain useful in years to come. Today we're up to lesson number 16 from On Tyranny, which is learn from peers in other countries. I'm going to read the lesson and then make a few remarks. Learn from peers in other countries. Keep up your friendships abroad or make new friends in other countries. The present difficulties in the United States are an element of a larger trend, and no country is going to find a solution by itself. Make sure you and your family have passports. So I'm an American and I'm a historian, but I'm not an American historian. I'm a historian of other parts of the world, and I've spent a good deal of my life in other parts of the world. That was of great help to me in writing the book. A lot of the things that seem commonsensical to me in the book, and which I think might have proved useful to Americans from the book, I learned from former political prisoners, dissidents, oppositionists in other countries. And this, in a way, is where the whole book comes from. I'm an American. I care about my country. I think I do have a sense of what's exceptional about it. But exceptionalism, the idea that your country is always and in everything exceptional, the idea that your country is always and in everything better than other countries, the idea that your country, for example, is automatically a democracy no matter what happens, that idea is doom. And that idea almost doomed us. It was that idea, or my opposition to that idea, that motivated me to write this book in the first place.
And also, when you embrace American exceptionalism, it prevents you from, getting better ideas from other places, By building these bridges and connections, you can facilitate the transfer of ideas from those areas into where they are sorely needed. I don't know, breaking out of American exceptionalism is, I feel like, is literally like the first step to healing a broken brain in America.
I felt very powerfully in the year 2016 when I first wrote this book that what I was seeing in the US was familiar precisely because I'd seen it in other countries. I'd seen similar things in Ukraine. I'd seen similar things in Russia. I'd seen similar things in history. And I was very worried by the American tendency, the American exceptionalist tendency to say, our institutions will protect us. This was a terrible mistake because, of course, institutions, whether they're ours or not, are only as good as we are. They only hold up when we prop them up. They only stand for us when we stand for them. And so the very idea that our institutions will protect us was a way of stepping back and relying upon precisely American exceptionalism. But American exceptionalism isn't something you can rely on. If it exists at all, it exists only in the individual exceptional behavior of individual exceptional Americans. We can see the same thing a bit now, too, with the hopes that people place in our Constitution. I like the Constitution.
Ooh, yeah, Charlie. Yeah, hand in hand with American exceptionalism, the idea that history is propelled forward by great men or great names. You know, I hate it. I hate it so much. Um, yeah, I feel like those two ideas, the sooner you throw them in the trash pail, the better. Hey, spicy diarrhea.
Too. I have a romantic attachment to the Constitution as well, but the idea that the Constitution on its own is going to...
Wait, you have a romantic attachment? Is it sexual as well? Is that why the Constitution is behind glass?
protect us in the 2020s is just not true. The idea that the Constitution alone is going to protect American democracy, is going to create an American right to vote, that's just not true. The ideas in the Constitution...
Hey yo, is that a Hancock? Hey yo, hey yo, ara ara.
The ways that the Constitution is interpreted, even what the very words in the Constitution mean and which ones we choose to emphasize, that depends upon us. That the Constitution has to do with rights, for example, is an idea that has to come from us. The idea that the Constitution involves a right to vote is not something which is necessarily clear in the minds of a lot of people who are interpreting the Constitution. That has to come from us. And that is, of course, one of the things that we can learn from other countries. Democracy, interestingly, really is popular among people and really is unpopular among oligarchs. And a lot of we see around the world a lot of the things we see around the world are just as simple as that. One of the things we can learn from other countries, from people who have behaved more courageously often than we have in places like Slovakia or Belarus, is that people really do care about voting, that people who have had harsher experiences than Americans have, people whose lives have been further down the line towards authoritarianism, realize just how important a vote is. That's something that we can learn from our own history, of course, but it's also something we can learn from other countries. But there's one more thing I wanted to say about this. Dropping the American exceptionalism is liberating. When you are living in...
It is! It allows you to see the world. It allows you to actually have unshackled perception of history. When you free yourself of the notion that America is somehow magically special, you are freeing yourself from the legacy of, westward expansionism and manifest destiny. It's really wonderful. It's really, really wonderful. And it helps make the world make so much more sense. You develop a kinder, more profound understanding of America's place in the world, and also of other people's place in the world. It helps you realize more the value of people around us. And yes, Lovely Pariah, there is a newish audio version with an extra section as well. Thank you for allowing us that knowledge.
In a world of American exceptionalism, you're expecting someone else to take care of things for you. That's not freedom. Expecting that America is going to take care of things for you is un-American. There is no America out there that can take care of things for you. America only exists insofar as Americans take care of things for themselves. There is no beautiful, perfect America that exists beyond the things that we say and we think, and above all, the things that we do. So in this sense, if you really want to be a free person, if you really want to be a free American, you have to drop the American exceptionalism. You have to drop that right away, and you have to realize we are all in this together. Democracy is rising or falling around the world. The lessons that we can learn are common, and the moment that we're capable of learning from other people, we actually become more free ourselves. That's what I meant by lesson 16. Thank you.
Cool. Let's go! So we're making good progress through these. And I just have to say, I think these these videos make me feel better. You know, they make me feel less like a passive viewer of the horrors that are being unleashed upon me, and more like I am an agent and I have agency within this system that, yes, is brutal and is awful and does, you know, induce suffering, but also I have agency. I have maybe the ability, when working together with others, to make it not like that, to make it better. And that is a comfort, I think, in my mind. Let's continue. Maybe we'll do one more. This is lesson 17, listen for dangerous words.
Greetings, I'm Timothy Snyder. It's the summer of 2021, and I am revisiting my book on tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. I'm doing this in part because it's been almost 5 years since I wrote the book. I wrote it in late 2016, trying to prepare Americans for the Trump administration, trying to prepare Americans for the decline of democracy around the world that we faced in the last 5 years. But I'm also revisiting it because it's coming out.
Oh boy, Tim, buddy, I got bad news for you. Out here in 2025, it hasn't gotten better, Tim. It's actually gotten a whole lot worse. Yeah, Nazis came back to Germany, so that's a thing now.
Out again in a new version, a graphic edition with updated text. I think the new edition is much more interesting and much deeper thanks to the fantastic work of the illustrator Nora Krug than the original book was. But I'm also just happy in general to have a chance to speak about the things in the book which, alas, are still with us. So I think it's right to say that when On Tyranny appeared, much of the reaction was, this is an exaggeration. Over the course of the 4 or 5 years since, most of the things that I talked about as possibilities in the book became realities. And of course, the larger point of the book is, if you can anticipate these things, if you can recognize them as they're happening, as they're incipient, then sometimes you can put a stop to them. So I think this unfortunately is the case. It's unfortunately the case that our problems were not just Mr. Trump. Our problems have to do with our institutions, with our constitutional system, and fundamentally with ourselves. So if we're going to solve the problems, we have to begin with ourselves, and that's where the book begins, with the things that we can do as individuals. Today I'm on lesson 17, which is listen for dangerous words. I'm going to read the lesson and then say a few words about what I meant by it. So, number 17, listen for dangerous words. Be alert to the use of the words extremism and terrorism. Be alive to the fatal notions of emergency and exception.
Okay. Yeah. Basically the buzzwords that herald power grabs or the ousting of political dissent. That makes sense.
Be angry about the treacherous use of patriotic vocabulary. So when I'm writing these words in 2016, what I have in mind as a historian are historical examples. I'm thinking of moments where a state of exception or the idea of an exception was used to shift from one kind of political system to another. Perhaps the classical example is the transition from the Weimar Republic in Germany to the Nazi regime in 1933, which Hitler justified by way of an emergency, which generated a state of exception. A more recent example is Russia at the very end of the 20th century, where Mr. Putin was able to manufacture what seemed like an emergency, a war, which justified the transition into a more authoritarian regime. But the truth of the matter is that we don't need those historical examples. If we look hard enough at ourselves, we can recognize something like this can happen to us because something like this did just happen to us. At the end of the year 2020 and the beginning of the year 2021, we as Americans passed.
Helena, I have not released that video yet. I will, though. I will.
Through a fake emergency. The fake emergency was the idea that an election was stolen. Nothing of the sort happened, but a fake emergency is the cover under which a real coup d'etat can take place. And of course, a coup d'etat was attempted. Insofar as that coup d'etat was resisted and defeated, it's in part because people were able to listen for and recognize dangerous words. People understood that when the president spoke of enemies, he often meant good citizens. People recognized that when the president spoke of fraud, he meant votes that he didn't want counted. People recognized that when the president spoke of cities, he meant black people and his idea that black people's votes shouldn't count. When we listen for dangerous words, when we learn from history and from our own history what words actually mean, we can get out a little bit ahead and stop the worst things from happening.
Yeah, I mean, guys, this is whenever a leftist, politics YouTuber channel talks about dog whistles, that's what Timothy Snyder's talking about. Listen for the dog whistles. The dog whistles are telling you what their real intent is. You've got to learn how to understand the language that conservatives communicate in, because it tells you what they want to do. And in their circles, they all understand exactly what one another is talking about. When they talk about the New World Order, or they talk about the globalists, or they talk about, the DEI programs. They all know what they're talking about. It's not confusing for them. Got to learn them. You got to learn what they're talking about. Got to learn their language.
Another very dangerous idea, which reappeared in late 2020, was the idea of a stab in the back. The stab in the back is the notion that the good guys would have won if not for the traitors at home. The stab in the back idea comes precisely from Germany in the early 20th century. It's the idea that Germany would have won the First World War had not the Jews and the socialists betrayed Germany at home. One of the things that I realized was dangerous, or that I recognized as a dangerous word in late 2020, was this idea that Mr. Trump articulated of being himself stabbed in the back. The idea that he, the most powerful man after all in the world, that he was a victim, that everyone was lined up against him, that he would have won had it not been for those traitors. That's a historical pattern which I noticed, but not only I noticed that. Fortunately, people who are smarter and more important than me also noticed that pattern and recognize that the stab in the back is not just a lie. The stab in the back is also an excuse.
Yeah, Tim. Sorry about that one. We did catch it initially, but then, we kind of forgot. We forgore. And he got elected again. You're gonna have to write a new book, Tim. I'm sorry, Timothy. You're gonna have to write a new book. Maybe like under tyranny this time. Maybe it's on tyranny again. I don't know. We'll workshop a title.
The stab in the back is a reason to say, they struck first, therefore all I'm doing is striking back. The stab in the back is a way that the powerful have of making themselves seem like the victims. The stab in the back is a way of saying that anything goes. We resisted that. We overcame it, at least for now. But those dangerous words of 2020, the big lie that Mr. Trump won the election, the big lie that the election was not carried out well, those dangerous words are still with us. We recognize them, many of us did, and that was very important. The next step, of course, is going to be good enough, is to become good enough patriots that we can find truths and that we can find reassuring words and that we can find better electoral institutions so that nothing like this ever happens again. Anyway, that was lesson 17. Listen for dangerous words. Thank you.
Oh man. I gotta say, folks, I'm not feeling too great. I'm not feeling too great about the direction we're going here. I feel like, maybe we didn't learn these lessons. If you're not on Tyranny, it's on you. On Tyranny 2, you never learn, do you? On Tyranny 2, Electric Boogaloo. God. Yeah, it is. I think a colder comfort. You know, it being the eve of like Donald Trump ascending to power, but like it's bleak out there, folks. But we need to remind ourselves that even in bleak times, we still have power, we still have agency, and we still have the option to refuse to bend the knee. And I think that's a pretty powerful form of resistance, you know? That being said, segment done.